Happy Pride, everyone, and welcome back to Empowered and Out, the career coaching podcast where we talk about purpose, confidence, authenticity, career transformation, and what it really means to build a professional life where you can thrive without losing yourself. I'm your host, Coach Jon, founder of Empowered and Out Coaching and creator of the new Empowered Career Transformation Program. This program is designed for professionals like you who feel stuck, burned out, disconnected, underconfident, or uncertain about their next career move. And through my purpose to placement framework, I help clients move from confusion and self-doubt into clarity, confidence, strategy, and aligned action. Because here's the truth. Career transformation is not about updating your resume or applying to more jobs. It's about understanding who you are now, what you actually want, and how to rebuild your confidence and how to position yourself for opportunities that align with your values, strengths, and the next chapter. And today's conversation connects so deeply to that work. My guest today is Andrew Whitson, joining us from Webster, New York, just outside of Rochester. Andrew brings a powerful blend of lived experience, education, leadership, DEI expertise, and heart to this conversation. He has a bachelor's degree in music education and psychology, a master's in organizational leadership and development with a specialization in organizational diversity, and he is currently in the dissertation stage of his PhD in industrial organizational psychology. That's a lot of words, and that's a lot. His dissertation focuses on the well-being experiences of transgender employees during onboarding of new jobs in the tech industry, which is such an important conversation when we think about belonging, psychological safety, identity, and the real human experience behind career transitions. Andrew is also the CEO and founder of Person First Consulting, where he provides career coaching, leadership training, and development and DEI consulting. His work supports professionals transitioning from college to career, professionals moving between industries or career paths, and organizations that want to create more inclusive, people-centered workplaces. One of Andrew's specialties is unconscious bias, and he has presented to students and professionals across industries on topics including motivation, feedback, social awareness, emotional intelligence, leadership theory, and inclusion. All very important. But what makes this conversation especially powerful is Andrew's own career story. After experiencing a job loss connected to, even though it's not technically proven, but to disclosure of his gender identity, Andrew turned a painful and unjust experience into the launch of his own business. Great idea, I have to say. A decision that eventually opened the door to more flexibility, new opportunities, and full-time work connected to his purpose. So today, we are talking about identity, career pivots, workplace discrimination. I just made up a word. Workplace discrimination, resilience, purpose, confidence, and what it can look like to rebuild after an experience that could have easily made someone question their worth. So, Andrew, I am so grateful you're here and welcome to Empowered and Out.
Thanks for having me, Jon. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Andrew, before we get started with all of my guests, I do an energy check-in.
Okay.
And so on a scale from 1 to 10, how is your energy level today and what's contributing to that number?
I would say it's an 8. I had a really, tiring but really empowering week last week. I got to meet one of my legends or icons, Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Oh,
So
very
it's
cool.
a really cool week. And I also have some more travel coming up this week. So it's that equally tired but motivated and energized kind of feeling where I'm traveling and doing things and getting to meet really cool people, but it's still tiring at the end of the day.
Nice. I like that. I am actually at like a 9.5. I'm excited for this conversation. I'm excited that we, first off, got to connect, and especially because even more on another level, I'm excited for this new program that I'm launching with my coaching program because I feel that it's really what people need. There's a lot of struggling employees out there, as you and I both know, and I think it's the right direction. I love the new direction that I'm going, and so
It's exciting. Congrats.
thanks. All right. Well, I would love to start with your story. So can you share a little bit about who you are, the work you do now, what led you into career coaching, leadership development, and DEI consulting.
Yeah, I guess, to set the stage for the story, I'd love to go back, a little bit further in kind of like my whole path, and I'll try to keep it succinct. But, I started off my career journey, wanting to be a music teacher. And that's what I did when I started. And I loved everything I was doing, but just realized, that K through 8 probably wasn't the right place for where I wanted to be long term. So kind of made that switch into higher education after that first year of teaching. And, basically, over my career in higher ed and in education technology, really one thing has stood the test of time, in that what really motivates me, or is my like guiding principle, is helping people get from where they are now to where they want to be next. So whether that's been through education or career, that's really been kind of what has guided me through my own career, and is what makes me get out of bed and excited for a day, is when I know I can impact the lives of those that are around me. And so kind of speaking to the recent story and launching my own business, I had a position where I was working with a team of great people, and I, kind of in my own dissertation process and self-discovery, decided to come out again at work as a gender queer individual. And, it was a really difficult conversation. And what I thought was well received, may not have been well received, or because I ended up having a really weird situation where I was offered another position. I was asked to stay with my current company and consult. And then when I went back to the job that had offered me a position, I mentioned that they were looking to have me stay on and consult. And so they ended up rescinding their job offer. And then the previous company I worked for decided to also let me go at that point, because I had been job hopping or looking for another job. So they questioned my, can't think of the word, but commitment to the job. And which was ironic, because they had asked me to stay. But anyway, and was willing to stay, right? And consult on a part-time basis. But I won't get into all of that. But basically that conversation surrounding, my gender identity and where I went next with my work, was a difficult time for me. And I'd love to say it was an instant phoenix rising from the ashes moment, but it was difficult. And I knew very quickly that I wanted to do something different, that I was kind of wanting to move out of that corporate, pseudo corporate world. And, it had, this situation, and had been laid off before from another ed tech company. And so it was like, I think it's time to start my own thing. And several people that I had worked with had said, like, you could do this on your own, and I had always kind of thought about it, knew consulting was something I was going to do, in life at some point. And so just was like, why not now? And so decided to launch. And we can talk a little bit more about the process there, but, met with several people that I, consider mentors or colleagues, to kind of run my idea by them and hone and craft until I came up with, this kind of two-pronged approach, where both helping people on the career side of things, so people transitioning. So I know you mentioned transformation, in terms of your work. And I think that really resonates for me as well, of people kind of transforming from college to career and how difficult that can be. But then also a lot of people who have been in a career for 10, 15, 20 plus years and are either needing to or wanting to transition to something else. So I kind of identified those two areas within career coaching that kind of fit my personal mission and experience. And then in addition, just kind of continuing to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work and unconscious bias training for a variety of places, whether it was for schools or for businesses, just kind of continuing to have those, sometimes difficult conversations. And it takes somebody that really knows how to guide and direct those conversations to avoid people getting hurt and, having a negative professional development experience. That was a very long-winded answer, but hopefully came to what you were looking for there.
Well, definitely. So when you think about the phrase person first, what does that mean to you in your work and your mission?
That's a great question. And, something that we talk about a lot in both psychology and in teaching is like person first language, right? So instead of saying, a disabled person, you would say a student with disabilities or a person with disabilities. So you're putting the person first instead of the disability. And, same thing with, any other affinity group, right? Like if you're saying, a Black person as opposed to a person of color, right? You're putting that person first language. And so that something that kind of stuck in the back of my brain. And in addition to that, I think from a business standpoint as well, my goal is to help people. And so, yes, of course, there's a monetary component to it, but really what I'm trying to do is help people get from where they are now to where they want to be next. It kind of resonates with that mission that I have and what I'm looking to do both, in terms of full-time work, but also in terms of this, additional consulting business.
Nice. I like that. It's really interesting. I mean, I find it very important. You should be putting, the person first. So, how did the person first consulting come to life? I mean, I know you kind of obviously you left left not by choice the company you're with and to
Yeah.
start your business. But how did it really when you just kind of gung ho? What happened?
Yeah. So kind of as another ironic point to this story, even though they had let me go, they, asked me to work out 30 days and, document everything and plan for my successor, right? Which was super awkward in terms of culture and personal feels. But in addition to that, it gave me some time and flexibility. I was like, so I know that there's an end date here. And so I had set, calendar appointments with folks that I, wanted to connect with and run this idea by them and get feedback. So I think I met with about 20 to 30, people that I either considered a mentor or a colleague just to kind of get their feedback. And in addition, I also offered a free career coaching session with, I think, about 20 people as well, just to kind of keep my wheels turning and keep, practicing and honing my craft. And again, like asking for feedback, and making sure what I was doing was resonating and that I wasn't having this idea that wasn't founded in the potential for success. So like success first coaching, right? So really,
Very nice.
I didn't want to fail. And I wanted it to be sustainable. I wanted to be something that I could grow and at the core of it, help people and help businesses be even better.
So looking back, what did that business you're consulting, what did it give you that traditional employment was not giving you at the time?
Yeah, I think the biggest one with this is, flexibility. And so my mother was battling cancer throughout all of this, and I was her main support, both in terms of going to appointments as well as finance and medicine and all that goes in with that really difficult component of life. And so, I've never worked at a place that just like gives you full flexibility to deal with something like that. I'm sure they exist, but
Not
it's
sure where they are, but
yeah.
yeah, I'm sure they exist.
And I mean, I don't want to go too negative, but I've heard a lot of horror stories of people that disclose, a medical diagnosis either for themselves or someone else, and then they end up getting let go or asked to leave. It's just a terrible byproduct of our current climate. And so with consulting and having your own business, it gave me the full flexibility to schedule things around her. And around what I had available, as opposed to having to, have availability for business. And, I needed to be somewhat available for my clients, but, there was pretty much ultimate flexibility in terms of making it fit around my schedule, and I was able to piece together some other things, to bring in income and to make sure I was taking care of myself. But that flexibility was really the ultimate benefit of that, especially for a time that was, challenging for me and my family.
I love that. The flexibility is huge. And you're right. I can't say that I haven't fully ever worked for anyone that gave a little bit of flexibility,
Yeah.
but I know that it was actually pretty amazing what I had received though at one point with the company I worked for. Instead of always having to use time off to go to like medical appointments or whatever it might be, my boss just said, okay, we'll try to schedule it maybe first thing in the morning, or try to, if you can schedule it first thing and then just come into the office after, or log in if I was working from home, log in after that. And
Yeah.
honestly, I had never worked for a company that had said that ever before, because I felt like we always were using some time to go to whatever appointments I had. And I will admit at the time, it was pretty helpful when I went to the dentist because they were like 3 blocks from where I lived. So
Right.
that was kind of helpful. So I could kind of, roll out, get dressed, kind of take my time, go to the dental appointment. And then if I was going into work that day, then go into work. But overall, though, I kind of feel I don't know too many companies that in businesses that allow it. So the flexibility is huge. And that is one of my, they always say the work-life balance, but one of my friends, she actually, when she started her coaching business, it's the life-work balance, because we need to enjoy our life, and then work's there, but let's do the life first, because that's what we're living to live, not living to work for someone else.
Yeah. And I think that was really one of the, silver linings of the situation that I went through, was that I was able to be there more for my family and for my mom specifically. So, I think everything happens for a reason. But I think to your point of, the differences in flexibility that exist, as a manager or as a leader, why not give your employees the flexibility or the benefit of living their lives, right? And I've worked for some managers that do offer kind of what you described, but I've also worked for folks that just have zero trust or zero, hierarchical leadership buy-in for something like that. And it makes such a difference, when you've got trust and psychological safety, and, not every workplace has those things, but they do really make a difference.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about your dissertation. It focuses on the well-being experiences of transgender employees during onboarding in the tech industry. So what made you choose that topic, and why does onboarding matter so much?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so when I think it was about 8 years ago now, filling out new hire paperwork for a job, and I was kind of going through all this paperwork. And over the course of my career, I've dealt with a lot of different applications, lots of paperwork that you fill out for jobs or careers or both. And I was just, thinking about it as I was going through. I was like, what would my experience be like if I didn't fit into all these little check boxes, right? And I had noticed on their new hire paperwork that the gender, it was just male and female. There was no other, there was no NA write in. It was just the two boxes. And I was like, that's not very inclusive. And I brought it up to HR at that point, and they're like, like no one's ever really mentioned that before. And I think you can probably sense that that's something that happens to me quite often. That I ask a question and they're like, no one's ever asked me that, or no one's ever thought about that before. And I'm like, that's me. But in that moment, I just was like, that empathy, right? Of like, what would because this doesn't really fit for me. Imagine what it would be like for someone that this really doesn't fit for. Someone who is trans, where it's not at all inclusive of their experience. Would I stay? Would I, express displeasure? Would I be instantly feeling like I don't belong in this company? And that is really what triggered me to have an interest and, find that there's really not a whole lot of information about, trans and non-binary individuals at work. It's getting better, but so much of the literature focuses on the experience of LGBT as an umbrella. And so often, and I'm sure you've seen this before too, but when we talk about LGBT, it's usually just LG, maybe B, and almost exclusively no trans just gets lumped in to the mix. And their experiences aren't often the same as, their lesbian, gay, and bisexual counterparts. So in many ways, there's just a gap in the literature for this type of, information. So yeah, here we are.
Nice. It is interesting because I worked the same company I was talking about. One of the things I thought was actually really cool what they did. We moved, when I first started with them, we were in the process of moving into a new office. We were waiting for the new office to be fully built out so we could move. And one of the things that they did, and they made a huge point of doing it, and they had talked to so many people about it, especially the LGBTQ plus affinity group, because they wanted to make sure this was going to work, is they did have they had the regular restroom, the regular bathrooms, and then they had multiple like restrooms that were like bathrooms that were set up for those who were trans non-binary, like that they didn't have to go into the main bathrooms. And I thought that was very cool because it just showed you in a way how kind of forward thinking the company was, because that was not anything I'd ever seen in any other company I'd worked for. And I thought it was pretty awesome that they knew that this was going to help them in the long run. And they saw where, work was going, where employees were going. Like they needed to make sure that that they really truly were inclusive to everyone, and they wanted everyone to be accepted. I thought that was really cool. So among other, that was definitely one of the things I was pretty impressed with when I saw that. Even though, and I got to see it before it was fully done, and then to see it actually when it was the bathrooms were completed, I was like, okay, that's really cool that they did that. So
It's such
yeah,
a small thing, right? Like
yeah,
to have the ability to go to a bathroom and feel like you are able to use the bathroom, right? Like, I think it's something that, cis people take for granted, right? Of just like, I mean, maybe women have a different experience with this than men, right? Because they might have to wait in a very long line depending on where they're going, but there's still any
true.
bathroom available for them. But I think a lot of TNB people, have a lot of fear and anxiety about using a bathroom because it may not be, all inclusive or at all inclusive. So yeah, but just again, that small thing that makes
Yeah.
such a big difference in someone's feeling of whether or not they belong at work, at school, you name it.
Well, and one thing I really liked is that they built the bathroom stalls as not American designed, but
Mm,
European designed. So there was no gap
yeah,
between like the door, and it was crazy how long the sides of the like stalls, it
yeah,
was. I'd never seen that before because, of course, that's not the American way to build our bathrooms in a corporate environment. So I was like, this is kind of cool. And you actually felt, wouldn't say safe, but you felt like you weren't
hiding.
hiding or being like, oh, there's Jon again. He's in the bathroom. Like you to walk by potentially seeing someone in the stall. Like you
Yeah,
couldn't see who was in the stall. And I liked that. And so I would hope that even though I am sure, I mean, we did have many trans non binary employees, I hope they actually still though felt maybe comfortable going to the regular bathrooms only because of how much more safe they were compared to the last environment we had been in before that company before they did that change. But who knows, you know. So to keep going on this, what are some of the unique challenges that transgender employees may face when starting a new role?
yeah, and I will profess, I am a member of the non-binary community, but my experience is different than a trans person's, and every trans person's experience is a little bit different. And so I haven't gotten into the lived experience part of this where I've interviewed folks. So I'm
Okay.
just going to speak about what I've experienced through my lens and what I'm anticipating, hearing from other folks. But anxiety about completing forms, anxiety about insurance. I think those are big things that, again, I think most people probably take for granted when they're starting a new job where it's just filling out paperwork and kind of going through run of the mill things. But yeah, like having to come out at work, um, am I passing? And when I say passing, like, do I look like my gender expression and my
Mm.
gender identity? Do they match or do they differ? And how might that impact my work experience? Does my documentation match? Especially with some of the recent changes in law in certain states, their documentation may not match their gender identity and gender expression. They may be denied, a job, or they may not be able to successfully go through the I-9 verification process. So these are just a couple of big barriers.
I was just like going, oh yeah, the good old I-9.
So yeah, and this is ever evolving. So I feel like
Yeah.
every week, every month, I'm reading or seeing something different that's happening in this landscape because it's hyper focused right now in this our political climate. But yeah, I mean those are just a handful of things. Coming out at work, documentation, and the coming out I think is not very new, but I think do you choose to disclose your identity at work or not? And some people may not choose to identify at work. There may be someone on your staff that's TNB and nobody knows, So food for thought.
Nice. All right. What do you think organizations can do in early in the onboarding process to create psychological safety?
It's a great question. And I think, one of the biggest things that I've seen that helps with this is feeling that when I'm interviewing, there is a sense of inclusion or psychological safety. And so what that can look like is, who are the people that are interviewing me? Is it, am I having an interview with just Jon, who's my supervisor at this company, or am I meeting with a panel? And I hesitate to say that panels are great because not all of them are, but it but it
They're
does
stressful.
it gives you a better idea of what to expect in your job, right?
Hmm.
Like, especially if you're
Right.
on a panel with people that will tangentially work with you, or the team that you're going to work with or on or for. It just gives you a better picture of what to expect. And I feel like in some panel interviews, you get a sense of how people work together or don't, right? And that can be really
Mhm.
valuable information for somebody that's coming into a job. I think another big thing that companies can do is if there's not a member of the LGBTQ community on every interview process, which may be unrealistic, make sure they're included in the process, right? So I think, you were talking a little bit about an ERG, and one of the purposes of an ERG can be to make sure that they are monitoring hiring practices to make sure that no bias is at play.
Mhm.
So then that works for the LGBTQ community, works for, people of color, indigenous, people with disabilities, all of these things. But making sure that your practices, your application, that whole process from when, you know, I click on an application and I want to see more, and that experience all the way through until the first day and beyond, I am treated with respect and kindness and included and have a feeling of psychological safety.
I like that. I agree. I never even thought about that, of having someone a part of, like, being a part of the LGBTQ community, being in like an interview or being a part of the process. Like, it makes sense. It completely makes sense. But I never even really thought about that. I was like, oh yeah, that would work. That would probably help, honestly, potentially make someone feel a little bit more comfortable and not so nervous also
Yeah.
in an interview.
Well,
But
kind of
again,
close,
I don't like panels. I don't like group interviews. They stress me out.
but just,
Or at least they did. But
that feeling of belonging, right? Like if I'm at an interview and I'll just use myself as an example, and I walk into a room and it's all white, straight, cis women, right? Like that experience is going to be very different than if I walk into a room and there are men, there are women, there are members of the LGBTQ community, there are members of or there are people of color, there are people with disabilities, right? Like this is just going to make me feel, okay, this is not just a room all full of people that are the same. And that's not to say that a room full of women that are all white and cis are identical, right? But it's just the
right.
optics, and the potential for people to be very similar.
That is very true. Very good point. So you do a lot of work around unconscious bias. So for listeners who hear that phrase but may not fully understand it, how would you explain unconscious bias in a practical, everyday workplace way?
I'm going to give two examples. I'm going to do a non-workplace example and then I'll do a workplace example.
All
But I
right.
think, one that I often use to kind of start the conversation with unconscious bias is if you think about in our society, and like if you're presented with two pathways and one has a green door and one has a red door, which one do you choose and why? And, John, what's your answer? I'll put you on the spot.
Green.
Okay. And it's not a trick question.
No, I was just, I mean, there is a whole psychology about
Yeah,
colors and stuff, but yeah.
exactly. And so, I wouldn't say everybody, but probably a majority of people that have been raised in the United States would pick green because green means go, right? Green is, a green stoplight. Red is a stop sign. However, if you think about it in the other cultures, maybe in like Asian cultures, red is good luck. So they might choose red. But again, that's in a completely different cultural landscape. And so that I think is a good non-work related unconscious bias of just like choosing something based off of a door. And then to kind of bring it into work, the one that I think all of us can probably relate to is if have you ever been in a meeting and, let's just say Sally is talking and, Sally has an idea, but Mark, the manager, just keeps cutting Sally off every time possible. Um, and Mark doesn't realize that he's cutting Sally off, but because Mark is in a position of power, he just kind of has that feeling that he deserves to speak more than Sally. And, we can get into gender dynamics there too. But basically, the unconscious bias at play there is Mark is speaking over Sally or interrupting Sally because of unconscious bias. Doesn't realize he's doing it, but is cutting a subordinate off because he feels like in his subconscious, his words are more important than Sally's. That makes sense?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I've been in meetings at 100 totally like that. Yes.
Yeah.
It drives me crazy when it happens. But so how can unconscious bias show up in hiring, onboarding, feedback, or promotion decisions?
John, how much time do we have?
As much as you need.
So the biggest one, and this is has been ever evolving is resume review. And we see a lot of this in higher education from admissions decisions as well, in terms of just name bias. And so as I'm combing through a pile of resumes, where unconscious bias comes at play is, so let's say, I am me in this example, I'm probably going to select somebody that resonates for me, unfortunately. And that's kind of what is the unconscious part of this, is I'm going to gravitate towards people with similar backgrounds, similar education, similar experience, and similar names, unfortunately. There have been some studies around this where if I'm combing through a resume and I'm Sally, HR recruiter, if I can't pronounce a name, I am highly unlikely to call that person because I am ashamed that I don't know how to pronounce that name and I don't want to have to say that on a call. And there's more to it than that. But
Yeah.
Sally's probably going to pass on a name that they can't pronounce simply because they can't pronounce it. And it jars their brain in a way that makes me say no. And again, this is unconscious. Now, there are some people that may be doing this consciously, but that's a whole different story. But I'd say that's a really big one. And that continues throughout the whole process, right? So from an interview standpoint, when I walk in, I kind of described this earlier. If I walk into a room and I don't see, visible signs of diversity, or I don't feel like I belong in this mix, that's, I would say a negative experience. And then, it can continue from there, of once an offer has been made, salary negotiation, unconscious bias can play a part in that as well. Women still are getting paid less than men on the dollar. No matter how much this continues to be something that is people are aware of, it's still happening. And, people of color are getting paid less than their white counterparts. It's just, and all of this is evolving, and there are slight improvements that are happening, but it is still rampant with unconscious and sometimes conscious bias.
What do you think is one thing leaders can do to become more aware of their own bias?
I think it's funny, like you basically answered your own question, right? Like we have to be aware.
Yeah.
The first step in all of this, and one of the reasons why I do unconscious bias work, is to build awareness of the issues. Because so often, like that example with Mark and Sally, Mark has no idea that he is doing something that is, potentially biased. Sally recruiter, when she's combing through resumes, she probably has no idea, right? This is unconscious. And so when we can bring awareness to some of those issues, get people thinking about what it is that they're doing, whether it's in their hiring decisions or their daily interactions with their staff, it just starts to kind of open up your mind a little bit. And so I've had people that have come back to me after a session of like, hey, yesterday I was talking with blah, 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 and this happened. What do you think? And like, that's taking it from the unconscious bias to the, I'm thinking about it, I'm recognizing it, maybe I'm talking about it with that person or with my team, and we are growing together. And so I think oftentimes, when I think about 20 years ago when I started in the workforce, these things would happen and no one would talk about it, right? So it just gets swept under the rug and you move on, and a lot of cultures were toxic and volatile, but you just kind of kept going. And those workplaces still exist, but I do like to think that there are some that are getting better, that are having some of these conversations, adapting emotional intelligence training. And it all bounces off of each other, emotional intelligence, psychological safety, motivation, feeling of belonging at work. These are all interrelated. And where it really starts is just from being aware of what those things are. What are some of the things that you personally need to work on? And then what does your team need to work on as well?
All right. Well, so let's continue on a little bit more on that, because so to have these conversations with, let's say, in your example, talking with Mark about him constantly talking over, how do you have a conversation with, let's say, Mark without making him feel immediately defensive or shut down because he's obviously doing something that's not right? But how do you not put him in his place, but make sure that he's aware of that he's constantly doing this?
So it really depends on your comfort with that, right? And your relationship with Mark. So I'd love to say there's an easy answer to your question, but it really is nuanced. So someone like me in that meeting with Mark and Sally, again, it depends on my relationship, but I would probably call attention to it there. And that's me being,
I probably would too.
being maybe a little bit more aggressive than your average workplace person, and being an industrial organizational psychologist, I'd probably feel compelled to say something. And again, what that does is it also validates whatever Sally might be feeling. And to your point, it puts Mark in his place, but it also, I think, sets the stage for it being okay to make mistakes, and that even your leader your leaders don't know everything. Shocker, I know, right? We don't know everything. We are also learning. And when you can have that emotional intelligence and feel like you are psychologically safe enough as a leader to profess that you've made a mistake and let's learn together, light bulb, right? Like that can be a light bulb moment. So
Nice.
I would call Mark out nicely, but directly in that meeting. Hey, Mark, you've interrupted Sally 3 times. I'd like to hear what Sally has to say, and then we'll hear your opinion. Now,
Nice. Okay.
if you are less confident than I, uh, another solution would be to have a one-on-one conversation with Mark immediately after that meeting and bring it to his attention. Mark may or may not remember that happened. So then if Mark's like, oh, that didn't happen, I don't believe you, then I would bring Sally into the mix. And I would have a one-on-one conversation with Sally. Then you and Sally either go to Mark or go to HR or both.
All right. I like that. I like both scenarios just because, yeah, you might not be comfortable enough to call them out,
Yep.
but I would. But well, I'll say this. I am comfortable enough in my skin in my 50s. When I was in my 20s or 30s, maybe
Not
not.
necessary. Yeah.
But I think through my learning and growing just in general in a workplace environment, you kind of have to curb that. And like, because it's, especially if you can see potentially Sally getting either annoyed or frustrated every single time, Mark is interrupting, then yeah, I mean, definitely has to be brought up. But
And Sally
all
probably
right,
would feel comfortable
to
putting
say it, yeah,
as like, she's a subordinate in this example.
yeah.
So
All right, moving on. So on this podcast and even in my coaching, I talk a lot with my audience about purpose, confidence, and career alignment. From your perspective, how can someone begin rebuilding their sense of purpose after a workplace experience that made them feel rejected, unseen, or even unsafe?
So my gut answer to that is therapy. if not Not therapy, then career coaching, right? Like you really
Yeah,
do need to have either, your own support system or, the support of a professional, whether that's a therapist, a career coach, or both. But I think a career coach is not a therapist, right? But in many
right.
ways they are a career therapist without the therapist credentials and the education sometimes. And so I think that is really important, that if you have had a workplace trauma, you really need to talk about it like you would any other trauma, whether it's with your therapist or a career coach. I think it's just really important to hash that out, get some closure and get some deeper understanding of what's going on, and then take that next step of going for what it is that you need. And I think as we age, you know, it becomes more important in the interview process of the questions that you are also asking. I think so often the trope is that an interview is for them to interview you. It should really be more of a 50-50, maybe 60-40, right? Where you are also interviewing them and making sure that you're getting what you need from this interview and from this workplace. And so I think really being intentional with the questions that you're asking to make sure it's a mutual fit. And I realize in this landscape, it's a little bit more nuanced. You might have
Hmm.
a job that doesn't meet all of your parameters just to pay the bills. But, I think really it is important to find the right job when possible.
I agree. I mean, I tell my, clients all the time, you got to really, as yes, they're interviewing you, but yeah, you're interviewing them. Like I had heard from someone, I think it was last year sometime. It was a great question. Like they always want to know, why should we hire you?
Mhm.
And I love that someone brought it up saying, well, flip it. Why should I hire you for my employer? Like why, kind of flip it on. I mean, not in that same kind of like verbiage, but it's kind of like, that
Yeah.
actually is a really good question, because if I'm really going to want to work for this company and be here potentially long term, what's so great about this company outside of what's on your website and what you've told, what I can read about? I want to know the real, details. Now, of course, no offense to HR, they're probably going to give you a very typical answer,
I was going to say,
something that's
I
already
can see that
yeah.
flipping on, like, do some research online and you'll find the
Yeah.
answer. Or
Yeah. Okay. So for LGBTQ plus professionals who are listening,
Mhm.
especially during this month of Pride, there can be a tension between wanting to show up authentically and needing to protect yourself in certain environments, especially during this, current political climate we are in. How do you think about that balance?
Yeah, that's a really great insight. And I feel like, my personal approach to this may not be the approach that works for everybody. But, for me, like pride is a year lifelong thing, right? It is not just a 1 month experience. And so for me, like, Pride Month may look like an extra, couple of pieces of information that I share, but I'm also doing that year round, right?
Mhm.
And so I think for me, what feels authentic is just to continue to do what I'm already doing, maybe with a little more gusto, but really just showing up and being my authentic self most of the time. I will say, for that may not work for everybody, right? And so I think you have to do what feels right for you. So if that is being extra gay, be extra gay. If that is being, that's being more quiet and reserved and, celebrating in your own quiet way, I think that's also okay. I just think, identity is such a nuanced thing and your workplace identity is as well. So whatever feels authentic and correct to you is absolutely what you should do year round and especially during Pride. But like so much, as like so much of Pride these days is performative and, commercial. And so to me, like the thing that makes Pride important is that we feel welcome, we feel like we belong, we feel validated at work. And that work takes more than just a month. That takes, really intentional conversations. It takes employee resource groups. It takes great leadership. And that, should be a year round thing.
I agree. It's not just 1 month, it's all year round. And I mean, me personally, if I'm looking at a company and I would go to their website and they only show anything pride related during the month of June and no other time, and there's really no sign of inclusivity or the ERGs or whatever, to the members of our community, I would probably stay clear of that company because there's probably something not there. There may be something you think is there for you, but the authenticity, the inclusivity is probably not as strong as it potentially could be in probably some other companies. So I always tell my clients, check out their website, see what they're doing. I mean, I'm not even with the company anymore, and I'm still on their ERG about like the LGBTQ plus community. So, I mean, because they took some pictures, and I was really close with the communications and marketing team, and they put some stuff out there that they'd photographed and videoed a lot during Pride Month, and so, and I was very involved in the ERG, so that's why I got thrown in there. But it was kind of funny still to look there and like, all right, cool. But it's on their website every day all day, it's not like they're not hiding anything. So
I guess one other
yeah.
thing I would add to that is, if you can't find it on the website and you're still interested in the company, ask a really like thought-provoking question during your interview, right? So something like I ask this question almost all the time in an interview of like, what does, inclusion or LGBT inclusion look like at XYZ company? And you'll know very quickly if they have, either a very well-rehearsed answer that they have crafted and put together, a quick but good answer, or they fumble, right? And they don't know how to answer your question or they're uncomfortable answering your question. And all of that is pieces of information for us in the community of whether or not this is going to be a good fit.
I agree 100%. All right. So we've been going deep. We've been real. Now we're going to get maybe a little mildly unhinged in the best way, because it's my favorite part of my interviews on my podcast, and that is my rapid fire question time.
Okay.
I'll repeat, rapid fire, quick answers only. It seems to be a challenge for some of my previous guests. And I just joke with that because they're friends of mine. So, but all right. What is one song that instantly puts you in a good mood?
Robin's Dancing on My Own.
A good song.
Such a good song.
Such a good song. I agree with you. That is yeah. That also makes me feel really old because I remember when I heard that for the first time. So, okay, if your career journey had a movie title, what would it be?
Now, Jon, you can't ask a question like that and expect me to have an answer quick.
Maybe a little longer, like then.
I don't know. It's a tough one. This is maybe sounds funny, but I was talking with a friend of mine last week about, just like some updates in my life. And she was like, this is my friend Andrew. He's kind of important. So I'd say like the movie title would be, I'm Andrew. I'm kind of important.
I like that. That's funny.
Something
and
that
I also,
it's my sense of humor and, I'm not too serious, but I'm kind of serious.
And I also understand the pressure to answer in the rapid fire. I don't know if I told you this. It's listeners can go and listen or watch if they want. I have my friend, a fellow coaching friend of mine, interviewed me,
Mhm.
and the rapid fire ones, whew, those are doozies. Like I was like, okay. And she goes, yeah, but you can actually cut them out of this interview. I was like, that is true. But I kind of like, it keeps people on their toes and,
Yep.
to, answer the question. So, okay. What is one small thing that makes you feel most like yourself?
So I'm a little bit of a bird nerd. So I feel like, when I see a meme about birds, or, if I'm out in the world and, come across a bird, that makes me feel like I'm me.
I like that. Okay. If you could give every workplace one mandatory training tomorrow, what would it be?
You know my answer to this. It would be unconscious bias, of course.
Yes, of course. Yes. And then last but not least, coffee, tea, or something completely different.
I'm a tea person, and I'll elaborate on that. I like most teas, but I'm partial to jasmine green tea and
Ooh,
then Irish breakfast. Those are my two go-to.
very nice.
Not English breakfast, Irish breakfast. Very key
All
distinction.
right. Okay. And the last question for you before we end, for someone listening right now who may feel, they might be feeling discouraged, rejected, or unsure if there's still a place for them to thrive professionally. What is one piece of encouragement or practical next step that you would want them to take away from our conversation today?
So I feel like the answer that they're probably hearing most frequently is keep going, right? And so I'm going to amend that and say keep going, but the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So keep going, but try something different. So if you're, applying on one site, try another site. If you're, applying one way, try another way. Go to a networking event, reach out to people one-on-one, set up meetings, whatever you're doing, mix it up, do something different. And I think in this market, if you're doing the same thing week over week over week, applying to hundreds and hundreds of jobs and getting nowhere, like many of your colleagues are, do something different, do something other people aren't doing. And that's going to be the thing that makes the difference.
That is such great advice because I'm sure you and I both have seen people on LinkedIn that have mentioned how many hundreds of applications they put in. And it's like, yes, do something differently, change it up. There's a reason it's not being seen or you're not being reached out to. And it's funny because there's so many, I know you know this, like there's something very tiny that you can make a change to that could get someone engaged and they could say, oh, okay, hey, let me check out Andrew right now. That actually sounded interesting. Or I also don't like how much people, this is my just personal 2 cents. I don't like that me personally, LinkedIn has become like another Facebook. It seems to be people are sharing all their personal information. I'm sorry. I'm not going to be looking at you. I want to see your business, not you're hanging out in as I just saw someone earlier, a bikini in a chair on the beach. Like, that's not, how does that show that you're a great employee that I want to hire you?
It's tough. And I think there's a lot of things that are changing right now in the work landscape, especially with, Gen Z continuing to be a growing presence and Gen Alpha coming of age. Lord help us. But, I think there's going to be some changes that happen. I mean, LinkedIn is a great example of that, of just like what is professional, what isn't professional.
Yeah,
And I think, there are some things that I think will always be ingrained in our minds as not or, professional, but the landscape is changing. And I think what has been happening in the workplace isn't working. And so
right.
something's shift.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. Yeah, there's definitely changes coming, especially Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Like they don't operate like like the rest of us do. So it's going to be very interesting. And honestly, companies have to be ready for it. They have to be ready to jump on board and really make these changes sooner than later.
Yep.
Because as we know, Gen Z is in there. They're in the workplace. Some of them are already in there. And so I know I 100% guarantee employers and HRs across this globe are frustrated in
Yep.
many of the ways that they work or don't work, but got to be patient. You got to figure out what you're going to do to retain those employees. So, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, will it be a bikini at work? Probably not. But I think the landscape
Probably
will
not.
change.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story, your expertise, and the heart behind your work. What I really appreciated is it reminds us, career transformation, it's deeply personal. I mean, I did a big transformation when I became a coach, so I understand it completely. Just kind of like you went in and changed And, it's not just about the job title, the resume, the offer letter, or even the next opportunity. It is also about identity, belonging, safety, confidence, purpose, and the courage that it takes to choose yourself after an experience that may have made you feel unseen or undervalued. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Great conversation, and thank you for what you do. And I think that transformation piece is a really great place, and I'm sure your clients love working with you, and hopefully you'll continue to have lots of great clients that you can help.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
So, for everyone listening, I hope that Andrew's story reminds you that one workplace, one rejection, one painful experience, or one season of uncertainty does not get to define your entire career story. Definitely does not. Sometimes what feels like rejection becomes redirection. And sometimes what shakes your confidence becomes the moment you start rebuilding it differently. And sometimes the next chapter begins when you finally stop asking, what is wrong with me? And start asking, what do I need now? And what kind of work actually aligns with who I am becoming? As I mentioned at the beginning, this is the heart of the work that I do in my Empowered Career Transformation Program. I help professionals move from feeling stuck, burned out, disconnected, or underconfident into clarity, confidence, strategy, and aligned action. You deserve to understand your purpose, rebuild your belief in yourself, position your value clearly, and take action toward opportunities that actually fit the next version of you. If this episode spoke to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a review and connect with me at Empowered and Out Coaching to learn more about the Empowered Career Transformation Program. It's available in both one-on-one and group coaching options. Until next time, keep choosing yourself. Keep trusting that your story is still unfolding. And remember, your career should not require you to disappear in order to succeed. See you next time.